Welcome to Spiritual Steps. This is episode 1, The Simplest Prayer, and I'm your host, Stephen Hovatter. So this podcast is all small steps on the spiritual journey, and I want to start with a practice that can be useful to everyone, the simple prayer of gratitude. One of my favorite lines about prayer comes from Meister Eckhart, who is this medieval German theologian, and it says, "If the only prayer you ever say in your entire life is thank you, it will be enough." Now, the profound truth within that line is that gratitude is at the center of our life of prayer, that it's one of the most fundamental, foundational ways that we relate to God. Gratitude in the Christian tradition points us towards God's identity as the giver of all good things. That's the theological line, right? It's a phrase that distills a verse from the book of James, and it's in James chapter 1, verse 17. It says, "Every good gift, every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, who does not change like shifting shadows." Okay, that's not just poetic. It holds this beautiful truth in it, that part of God's identity in the way that God has been revealed to us and the way that we understand God, and the way that we relate to God, is that God is the giver. God is the great giver who brings every perfect gift into our life. Every good thing comes from God. But also, embedded in the prayer of gratitude is not just recognition of God's identity, but recognition of our own identity, that I am a receiver, that we are receivers of the good things of God. Although we're surrounded by brokenness and we're in suffering, and sometimes we even taste that brokenness and suffering ourselves, we experience it in our own bodies, there is much that is good. And it begins with the gift of life itself. Life, this beautiful, crazy, mysterious experience of being alive, is a gift. And part of our identity, part of our core identity as humans, is that we are people who have received the gift of life. And there's, of course, lots of other good things that we've received too. We receive the pouring out of love that happens in just the wild mix of humanity. We've received the gift of Jesus. As Christians, we believe that God has given us this great gift in Jesus the Christ. We've received, little things like the kinds of things that sustain our bodies and the things that sustain our spirits and our souls. Gifts that we're probably conscious about, like food and shelter, and gifts that we don't really think about, like the way that language can convey such things to our hearts and spirits, that we are sustained deeply in our soul. So we are the great receivers. God is the great giver. And these identities, these two related identities of giver and receiver, are part of what make up the story of our faith. They make up the story of who we are, what we have been able to receive, and then, of course, what we're able to give. Now think about this. It brings us back to this most essential prayer, which is simply thank you. Thank you. It's a great place to begin in prayer. In fact, it's the prayer that I'm teaching my little 2-year-old son. Deacon and I, when I put him to bed at night, I simply have him kind of repeat after me. I say, "You want to pray?" And he's like, "Uh-huh." And we say, all right, just this little repeat after me game. We say, "Dear God, thank you. Amen." And that's it. Right? It's not a complex prayer. It's a very simple, fundamental, foundational prayer. In his little voice, he's not necessarily thinking about the mysteries of the gift of life or anything like that. We're just rehearsing the spirit of gratitude. And I hope that simple prayer will become the foundation for how he relates to God as he over life discovers the gifts, and he discovers the profound good things that are a part of the world. And as he has to face the brokenness and suffering and the things that are evil and wrong in the world too, I want him to be able to have this core, this central part, which is the essential gratitude, okay, that makes up part of his identity as someone who receives goodness, and which points him to the one who is the giver, that God is the one who, bestows the world with beauty and love and wonder and life. And so that's what I'm teaching him. And so, it can be a simple place for someone who is just a beginner to start with. Like if you are just starting out in the journey of prayer, just beginning to turn your eyes to try to discover what it means to be a person of prayer. Like this is the simplest, most essential, fundamental place to go to just practice the prayer of gratitude that says, thank you. It doesn't have to be something complex. Like some people make the mistake of when they begin in prayer of thinking they have to get into this really complex ritual or something like that. And it doesn't have to be like that. Just start off with this simple step of learning to offer the prayer of gratitude. This prayer also is a great place to return to if you are a person who has had a life of prayer for some time, but you're in a moment when your prayer life has become so clouded, whether it's by complexity or confusion or loss or grief or busyness or whatever. The prayer of gratitude, the simplest prayer, is a great place to return to begin to rebuild a life in the Spirit, to begin to kind of point your life back into the trajectory of learning to pray and to be a person who is following the journey of prayer. So, whether you're a beginner in prayer or whether you're somebody who has sought the way of prayer for many, many years and needs to turn back to something, I want to encourage you to take a moment today, to take a moment and allow the practice of this simplest prayer to be a step forward in your spiritual journey. And then let it be something. Let that experience be kind of a concrete hook that you can come back to when you need to. When you're in those moments where you don't know how to pray or what to pray. And everybody comes to these places, okay? Let this simplest prayer, thank you, let it be a place that you can return to over and over again. Whether that be just that's all the prayer that you can manage for some particular day, or whether it be you're going to sit and have maybe even a fuller experience of prayer on some afternoon, but this is a beginning place for you. Let this be a central place that you can come to. Now, in concrete terms, when I want to have a simple moment of prayer, when I want to begin with this prayer of gratitude, then here's what I do, okay? Now, nothing magical about this. It's just that it's a way of, for me to naturally come into or maybe not naturally, but it's a way for me to enter into the essence of what this prayer is. So you find somewhere where you can sit comfortably and you just take a couple of moments to just be and breathe, okay? Now, nothing fancy here. You just want to become fully present to yourself. And that's not our default mode of being. So be still and for a moment, just breathe in, breathe out, deeply, wholly breathe. And dwell for a moment on the gift of life. Breathe it in, okay? Pull all that is good into your body. Okay, dwell for a moment about what it means to have experienced life and the essential goodness of that. Okay, let gratitude well up inside of you. All right? Draw in gratitude, let it well up inside of you, and then, very simply, say to God, thank you. And rest for a moment. Be still. Take a few more moments to just breathe in calmly. And then you're done. Now, this is a simple prayer, but you may trust that the Lord hears it. See, prayer is not necessarily an act, a practice that requires us to draw some complex formulas to do something really, fancy or ethereal. It is just giving ourselves the space and time to communicate what is most fundamental to our lives and to our souls. And this moment, this particular moment of gratitude, it's a small step. Like, you're not going to walk away from this going, my life is totally changed and different. In fact, if you skip doing it, you're not going to think to yourselves, man, I've really messed up and I have eternally messed up my life here, okay? It's a small step, but it's one that you can often return to. And it has some sort of cumulative effect, I think, as you seek a fuller connection to the Spirit of God. The path of the Spirit is made up of such steps, small moments, which over time begin to form us in the image of Jesus. Part of that image is a realization that God is the giver, that we are the ones who have received, and that the gifts that we have received, things like life, grace, sustenance, these things are meant to draw us into relationship with the one who is the great giver, but who is also at the same time the greatest gift of all. God draws us into communion and draws us into this relationship that allows us to experience not just God as a distant giver, but God as a near one. In that relationship, the communion with our souls and the Lord is indeed the greatest gift of all. Take this small step, and may God be with you on each and every step of your journey. Amen.